In this video, I'll be talking about how to design a poster. Poster presentation are common in academic environments such as conferences and are often presented as a printed poster. However, they're also sometimes used in industry settings. They're a great way to convey information in a short, visually appealing way. And while poster content should stand on its own, they're often accompanied by a presentation, so it's important to distinguish what will be included in the actual poster and what will be instead presented. In order to make a poster, you will need to analyze and evaluate information, synthesize ideas, and creatively demonstrate your understanding of a topic or the findings of your research. Although many students view poster presentations as something that's easy, they actually require a lot of thought and preparation. So in this video, I will walk you through some best practices for content layout and designing your posters. When it comes to content, you want to make sure that each poster you make has a clear title so that the reader knows what the overall topic is about. Obviously, posters will include some text, but it's important to keep the text short and use it to convey key information, and instead rely on the presentation to expand and give more details or examples. Think about using the text think about chunking the information in the text into smaller bits, for example, using bullet points, lists, or just short paragraphs. And you can also highlight text in different ways by using bold fonts or different colors or underlining things. This will help the readability and conveying the information. Along with a title for your overall poster, you also want to have clear headings for the different sections of your poster. And finally, for each section of your poster, you want to make sure that you have references that state where that information is coming from. For the paragraphs included in your poster, like I said, try to keep these short. Ideally, you would like to keep it to about 50 to 75 words per paragraph to avoid any monolithic paragraphs of prose. So if you do have a large chunk of text, try to summarize it. Think about what are the key points that you want to convey. And then think about whether your poster stands alone on its own if somebody were to just skim through it and read it without hearing your presentation. The presentation is there to give more details and examples. One way to keep text short is by using graphics and any kind of visual element. This can be images, graphs, tables, diagrams that can help you convey the content of your poster. Please remember that each image or graphics need to have a caption or it needs to be linked to the text that it's referring to in the poster. Try to keep any images simple and make sure to then refer to them in your presentation. So let's look at some examples of how you can include graphics instead of text in your posters. This paragraph conveys a particular topic, but it's perhaps not as clear what that topic is without reading it in detail. So one thing that we could do is try to create a graph out of this data. So here we quickly understand that actually that text is about the rise of atheism in Australia. And that information is provided by the title of the graph that you see here. On the y-axis, you have the percentage of the population. On the x-axis, you have the years over time. And then you see three lines that convey how changes have taken place over time. The blue line represents Christianity, and we can see that from the early 1900s, Christianity has been falling, whereas around about the 1960s, atheism has been rising in Australia. The grey line represents no response, which has been fairly consistent over time. This graphic and this graph conveys the information that was previously in a paragraph in a much clearer, more digestible way. Obviously, in your presentation, you want to talk through this graph and explain what it means, and you can provide more of the details that were present in the paragraph as well. So just make sure to point to it, talk about it, and explain it in your presentation. Another way is to use icons and symbols. This can help you differentiate content. In this poster example, different social media platforms are being compared based on their pros and cons. And the poster does something very simple, which is to use the icon for a thumbs up or a thumbs down to convey pros and cons. And in addition to the thumbs up and down, it also uses color coding. So green for pros and red for cons, as this is an association that is generally well recognized. This allows to avoid having extra text for headings, but it still helps convey what different sections of the paragraph of the poster represent. Another example is to think about what is the type of information that you are trying to convey. How can different types of information be visualized? In this poster, we have different examples. Here on the top right, we have a timeline. So this poster is about Twitter. And the timeline talks about the history of Twitter and how it's changed and developed over time. And one of the things that we can quickly glance at without even reading is that in 2006 is probably when it started, or certain events were happened. And 2007 is the year that lots of things have happened, because there's 4 different points being made, whereas the following years there's fewer events happening or being highlighted. And this is something that I'm able to infer from the poster without even reading the content. Obviously, reading the content will give me even more detail. Another point here is using a map to convey the spread of use of Twitter in this case, but you could think about it, applying it to whatever information you're trying to convey, using a map to understand how broad or distributed something is. And in the top left hand of this poster instead, what they've done here is to try to summarize key facts about Twitter by highlighting particular numbers and using, again, icons of people, maps, and other forms of icons to convey information. Another example of use of graphics is to think about how do we convey connections and relations between different elements. So this graphic here is trying to talk about data management systems used by a particular company, and they have different elements, smart meters, renewable energy, satellite telemetry, irrigation, and so on. And it's talking about how their product is connected to a dashboard and applications and how it all brings everything together. Now, this graphic doesn't give me a lot of details about how the different elements are brought together, so it's not necessarily the best example, but it's one way to show how you can summarize information and add more detail in your presentation, for example. And finally, another way to include graphics is by adding infographics. So general imagery that kind of summarizes key concepts. For example, talking about gender issues or gender differences by using icons and filling out based on percentages, for example. If you don't feel very artistic, there are lots of tools that are available online, and many of them have a free version that you can use to create these graphics or information or kind of imageries or infographics, displays, graphs. If you don't feel particularly artistic, there are many tools that are available online. Many of them have a free version as well that you can use to create images, graphs, infographics, and other forms of visuals. I particularly like Canva, but you might want to explore others as well. When it comes to the actual design of your poster, think about orientation. If you're using PowerPoint, just because PowerPoint defaults to landscape doesn't mean that that's what you have to stick to. Think about what is the information you're trying to display and what is the best way to display that. One thing to keep in mind at this point is the reading path. In English-speaking countries, we tend to read from top to bottom and from left to right. So I've demonstrated here how different layouts of a poster might be read. Now, the first two examples seem fairly straightforward in terms of how one would scan through the content. The second two examples are perhaps less obvious how you would move around. One way to add more clarity here is by adding arrows that direct the reader onto what is the next section they should focus on. But perhaps you want to think about if that is the best use of space. There's also placement of text and images that needs to be kept in mind, making sure that it's absolutely clear what text is referring to what images and vice versa. And like I said, if you're including images, make sure that there's a caption or some sort of heading for it. And then finally, you want to think about spacing. It's important to leave white space around the text so that it kind of helps readability and make sure that your eyes are rested. Obviously, it doesn't have to be actual white space, it can be colored, but you want to avoid having too many images and too much text on your screen or on your poster. It's good practice to keep the number of colors used on a poster to a minimum. Ideally, between 3 to 5 colors is what you're trying to aim for. Perhaps a background color, a color for your text, and a color for accentuating certain elements, so drawing the attention to certain bits of your poster. Obviously, this applies to any kind of imagery you're using as well. So if you're using images from the internet, you might want to think about, can I redesign these? Can I remake a graph, for example, or a table to be in line with the color scheme of my poster? Again, you don't have to be an artist here. There are tools online that help you pick a color palette and pick ones that go well together. Lastly, thinking about font. This slide is here to illustrate the point of font size. Just because you can make your font go really small doesn't mean that that's what you should be doing, especially if you're using a small font in order to cram more information into the poster. Think about what you can cut out. Ideally, what you want to achieve is a title of a heading of around 60 to 70 points. Any headings should be around 30 points, and paragraph text should be around 18 points. And these three examples are exactly at 60 points, 30 and 18. And again, thinking about poster presentation, if you are doing a printed poster, you can use serif fonts. But if you're focusing on posters that are presented on a screen or online, sans serif fonts are a better choice here because it helps. They provide fewer details and help with readability on a broad range of screens. Another way to add that white space on the screen is by thinking about how you thinking about line spacing. So think about having a 1.5 or double spacing between lines or paragraphs is a nice way to add blank space. And finally, try to avoid uppercase because this can be harder to read. So here you have a few tips that can help you design a better poster.